Hmm. What a lovely musical reminder. Thank you. We are almost halfway through the Christian liturgical season called Lent. And I'm sure a few of you remember giving up something for Lent. Yeah? Chocolate? Isn't it a shame that Valentine's Day always follows in the middle of the Lent somewhere? It's usually right the first week or so of Lent. So this idea of taking a period of time for giving up something is not unique to the Christian tradition. In fact, the idea of taking several weeks, a lunar cycle usually, in prayer and fasting is built into the Muslim tradition, and it was in the Arabic tradition before Muhammad. In fact, it was while he was praying and fasting in the caves during Ramadan that he received the revelation known as the Quran. So it's long before Islam. That idea of taking a time of separating oneself from one's normal life and going inside and shifting one's priorities is really what it's about. This idea that of 40 days, this is what Lent is now, it's kind of emerged over time. It's fun to do the studies because there was no consistent tradition. Even when the Nicene Council established Christianity as the Roman Empire religion, there was no idea about this. You know, we should fast something around Easter. We should do something to prepare for it. Well, some people said 3 or 4 days. You know, fast from Good Friday through Easter or to Easter morning and feast on Easter. And some people said, well, really we should fast for the whole Passion. And, well, the Passion is from Palm Sunday to Easter, right? Except, well, let's fast for the week before that, too, because he was preparing. Well, but, you know, when Jesus went in the wilderness, he fasted for 40 days. So maybe we should make it 40 days. But you can't fast for 40 days and live a normal life. So why don't we make Sundays feast days? So, and this has happened over a 2,000-year period, backing and forthing. What are we really trying to do here? Where it has landed is Lent is 6 Sundays and 40 weekdays, starting on a Wednesday prior to the Sunday that is Easter. So Ash Wednesday is the beginning of Lent. And why is it Ash Wednesday? Well, remember way back when we talked about Imbolc? Yeah? That this midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox that is the midpoint of winter. There were the bonfires. You clean out the greens from, you know, Christmas time, the solstice time, and you bring in fresh greens and you know, get rid of the bugs and all the stuff that's accumulated and clean out. Those bonfires had ashes, so people got ashy. And so traditionally in the northern climes, this fasting period would begin with those bonfires. And there's several good reasons. We talked about the fact that, you know, most of the birds are gone, most of the, you know, mammals are hibernating, the fish are under the water. There aren't any, you know, really good food supplies during this time, so you're still living off of the harvest of last year. The only problem is it's getting warmer, and they don't keep as well. So before we have the going into the, okay, we'll just stretch these out as long as we can and eat as little as possible time, you have a big feast day to get rid of all the stuff that's about to spoil. And it's called Fat Tuesday. Mardi Gras. Big feast day. Used to be tied to Imbolc, now tied to the beginning of Lent. All right? So in Germany, you have special donuts. Yes. And in, you know, France, you know, have a variety of things, and you know, and in the English tradition, you have pancakes. And now, why pancakes besides butter and ham that you have with them? Well, it turns out that some people thought that in order to diminish the power of in bulk, which means in milk and means you can start eating dairy, no, we won't even eat dairy. So they would finish up all of the dairy, the milk and the cheese and the butter and the eggs in the pancakes on Shrove Tuesday. Well, what's Shrove got to do with Mardi Gras, got to do with Fat Tuesday? Well, it happens that this is the day that we shrive ourselves in preparation for Lent. So it is Shrove. You've been Shrove Tuesday. What fun, huh? All is adopting and adapting. I'm gonna switch to the other mic and come around. Can you still hear me okay? Not too much echo? Good. So all of these fun explorations of ways that we could prepare for Easter. Well, one of the reasons that the early church didn't really talk about Easter was because they celebrated it every Sunday. Every time they came together. If you've ever been through a Mass or you've been through a communion service in a Protestant church, you know you are celebrating Easter Sunday every time. Why set up a special day? Why set up a special time? So they didn't think about it as something to prepare for. So that's why there really wasn't anything in place when the Nicene Council was established. It really wasn't until they started sending the missionaries out into the colonies, into the provinces, to say, find out what people were doing and try to adopt and adapt, that this fasting thing that people were already doing in the northern climes got woven into the church and the Roman process. Well, why 40 days? I have this image that I use. All through the Old Testament and through most of the Quran, you'll see that the important things of life take 40 days. The really important things, or 40 years. Well, imagine this. Yeah, 40 years in the wilderness. So imagine this. We're all sitting around the fire at the end of a long day, and our shoes are out at the door. Our sandals are outside the door, so we didn't track in a lot of dirt into our freshly, greened and strawed home. And so we're sitting around the fire, and there's the storyteller, and the storyteller is telling the story of how for example, after Jesus was baptized, he was so overwhelmed by the Holy Spirit that he had to go away from everyone else, and he went into the wilderness, and for 40 days he fasted. Well, 40 days is a long time. It's more than all the fingers and toes you and I have together. That's how much 40 is. That's a big number. That's where I think 40 came from. It's a big number. It's as much as you can count when two people are in the same space. It's a standard number. It has nothing to do with sevens, which is the holy. It has nothing to do with 3, which is another holy number. It's just as many fingers and toes as we've got between us. So, nonetheless, it is biblical as a result, because all of those oral traditions got written down in what we call the Bible. So 40 days is the number. And now, because the Roman Church in particular and the Anglican Church following it and all of the higher Protestant churches are trying to make sure everyone gets 40 days of fasting, but they can't do it in the normal life, Sundays you can feast. So 6 Sundays and 40 weekdays between Ash Wednesday and Easter. Advent is the same way, supposedly. It was, until it got too hard to figure out, because Thanksgiving was in the middle of Advent, or at the beginning of Advent too many times, and you were feasting on a Thursday and you couldn't fast. So that's when Advent got shrunk down to 4 Sundays before Christmas. Then it was always usually beginning the Sunday after Thanksgiving. It was your last feast before your fast. Why fast? One of my favorite teachers, many of you have heard me talk about her many times, Emma Curtis Hopkins, has a very interesting comment on fasting and a number of other things. She says, when we are learning how to be spiritual, people will tell us that so-and-so does this and so-and-so does that, and we decide that must be how they became spiritual, and so we do that. Remember what I said. Jesus was so filled with the Holy Spirit that he had to withdraw into the wilderness. It was because he was spiritual that he fasted. He didn't fast to become spiritual. But the institutionalization of religion is such that we tell everyone they have to fast to become spiritual. Isn't that interesting? What is a fast? We can fast from anything. We can fast from driving. We can fast from sex. We can fast from chocolate. We can fast from food. In fact, we fast every day. That's why we eat break fast in the morning. We've been fasting. Isn't that interesting? So, if one fasts because one is spiritual, rather than fasting in order to be spiritual, what are the benefits? What is it that we're actually doing? One of the stories we're told about that time that Jesus went into the wilderness was that the devil came and tempted him. In the world of the teachings that I've been doing, the devil is that part of the mind that is attached to material reality and thinks that everything needs to be done by controlling and planning and making things happen my way. And what he tempted Jesus to do was turn the stones into bread. And Jesus said, I've got other bread. I don't need to do that. He was already taking in what the Hindus call prana, and the Chinese call qi, and the Japanese call ki. He did not need to eat substance, stuff, form. He didn't need the form because he was taking in the life energy through the breath and through the sight and through the sound, through all the vehicles for receiving that the human body has. And of course, that's very much built into the Hindu and the Chinese and the Japanese spiritual life. Learning to do that. So the point of choosing to fast would be to learn how to be nourished by life energy rather than stuff. And so when you go into an ashram or you go into certain monasteries, you will be encouraged to eat in a very different way. In the Buddhist tradition, a monk has a bowl, and that bowl gets filled once a day. St. Francis adopted the same tradition when he established his order. Everyone has a bowl. That bowl gets filled, or it doesn't, once a day, and that's it. The rest of the time, we are nourished and replenished and supported and supplied and energized by the quantum field, if you will, the spiritual substance that is so subtle, that is everywhere, and all we have to do is breathe or look at a setting sun or do any of those wonderful practices that allow us to receive what the universe is always giving us instead of focusing on the next meal. So part of what's happening here, if you choose to fast, which is why Lent was encouraged and why Advent as a fasting time is encouraged, is to begin to realize we are not dependent on stuff. The only thing we are dependent on is what the Unitarians refer to as the one God, the one source, the one creative power that is constantly creating and nourishing and supporting us. I've been rereading the autobiography of Yogananda. It's wonderful. Paramahansa Yogananda. I just reread the part where his master, his teacher, his guru, if you will, Yukteswar says, "You are no longer Swami, you are now Paramahansa." And and Yogananda's first thought is, oh, those Americans are going to have a hard time with this one. I'm trying to say Paramahansaji. But as I'm rereading this, one of the things that I'm discovering is that many of the people he encountered had no need for physical repast of any kind. He spends quite a bit of time with a woman in Germany, Therese, during the 1890s to 1920s. Yes, a Therese, who is a Breatharian. I got it. Good. Well, maybe you might consider this. She's a Breatharian. At the age of 13, she'd heard her father complain about how much she was eating far too many times, and she prayed to God, and she never had to eat again. And she lived until she was over 50. And there was a lot of documentation, a lot of experiments, lots of times to prove that she wasn't, and she was. That was interesting. Well, and then he went back to India after he'd been in this country for about 15 years. In 1935, he went back and he found an Indian saint, a woman in India, who never ate anything. And she wasn't very thin either. She was built kind of like me. Never ate anything. Now, Teresa did take Mass, I think almost every day. So she did have the branded wine once a day. That was it. That was her whole thing. But this woman in India did not, because she didn't have that tradition. She didn't need it. Isn't that interesting? Very healthy, fully functioning, never ate, never drank. What's going on here? And never a sense of lack. So I got very interested in Breatharians. And I actually have managed to go sometime myself. But it's very difficult in a social environment, you know? There's a guy in Australia, 2 years, documented, never ate or drank anything. But he gave it up because all of his friends got together over meal times. Right? If you're going to socialize, you need to do something. Right? When the resurrected Jesus or the resurrected Babaji or the resurrected Yukteswar or whoever it might be is reported as having shown up, he will often have something to eat with people. The life and teaching of the masters of the Far East, all of the masters were more than happy to serve a meal and join in the meal, or they'd go for days without anything. Didn't matter. It didn't matter. And that's the whole point. We are invited to appreciate all the ways that the universe shows up to support us without being attached to a particular form, including food and water. That's what it's all about. So what is a cultural tradition because of lack of refrigeration, basically, in the northern climates, is a spiritual tradition in the southern climates where there's always plenty. An opportunity to live life fully without being dependent on a particular form. Dr. Oz has a new thing out. He's encouraging people to fast, sort of a partial fast, 4 or 5 days a month. And this is actually pretty consistent with European traditions around how we might maintain healthy bodies. The body readjusts itself. It clears out toxins and sets up all kinds of things. So he suggests cutting back to something under 1,000 calories and having it be no meat, no toxin stuff, some organic vegetables and olive oil and coconut oil and avocado oil and vegetable stuff. He's not seeing this as a spiritual practice. He's just seeing it as a physical practice. But can you imagine what happens when people start making a conscious decision? Part of why we have diets is to help us be consciously in charge of the choices we are making. Most of us make our choices pretty unconsciously. What would happen if we started to be very conscious about all the choices? And what would happen if we started to know that it is not the form, but the substance, the qualities that the form represents that we are going for? So let's say that it's Valentine's Day and you're thinking chocolate. Right? There's a beautiful story written by Spider Robinson about a fabulous dancer, incredible dancer, only you know how small ballerinas have to be? Well, she wasn't. Beautiful, beautiful dancer. Spider Robinson is a science fiction writer. I'm inclined to believe that he's Robert Heinlein's unspoken son. He writes the same way. He's taken over the heritage, et cetera, et cetera. He's a very fine writer. And he wrote a book called Star Dancer. And this woman, who was too large to be a ballerina on the planet, was invited to come out to space and dance in no gravity, zero gravity. And she became absolutely, instantaneously, the most fabulously well-known and beloved dancer among all humanity. But she kept wanting a larger and larger space. And they could only create certain sizes, right? So what happened in the course of this story is that an alien life form worked out a deal with her. And basically, it completely coated her whole system, all the tubes, and all of her skin, so she could dance without any shelter. So they set up a symbiotic relationship. They absorbed the energy of the light. They fed and nourished her body, but she could never go back into a closed environment again. Fascinating story, eh? Sacrifice? I don't think so. The narrator in the story is a man who is in love with this dancer. She's out there. What's he going to do? He chooses to do the same thing. He enters into that symbiotic relationship with this organism that is now his inside-outside spacesuit. And he says, every now and then, I wish I could have a steak and baked potato, but I've got the memory. I don't need to do it again. Wow. It's not about the form. It's about the quality and the substance. The experience that we have already had once is very much alive in us, and we can use that. And that, in some ways, is part of what Jesus must have been talking about when he said, I don't need this solid stuff. I've got this quality, this spiritual life force, these ideas, these memories, these awarenesses that are alive in me. And we all do too. We all have everything we could ever need or want in us, through us, around us, supporting us, sustaining us. We don't need an alien life form. We've got the universe. We've got all that is, totally available to all of us all the time. And this is the other side of universalism that isn't talked about too much. Usually when we talk about universalism, we do, as Sally said the other day so beautifully, no one left out. Right? Everyone gets to go to what's called heaven. Nobody's left behind. But the other side of that is all of it is available to each and every one of us. In fact, all of it is contained in each and every one of us in the holographic universe. Each and every one of us is the whole universe. We do not ever have to reach out, look out, grab from out there. Once we learn to go through our heart, our soul, our essential selves, and access whatever it is that we're ready to experience. And that is why fasting happens. Thank you very much.